Have you ever felt worn down in ways you couldn't quite explain? You're still functioning, still performing, but your body is sending signals that you just keep brushing past. This week, I talked with Garrett Wood, founder of Gnosis Therapy, about how burnout often shows up long before we reach a breaking point and why recognizing those early signs is so important. Garrett shares how his own experience with chronic pain and relentless pressure reshaped the way he understands stress, performance, and resilience. What looked to him like physical issues were actually signals of a nervous system under constant strain. Here we talk about why high performers are especially likely to miss early signs of burnout, how to manage stress in place without overhauling your life, and why being proactive matters. Garrett also shares simple, practical ways to regulate stress and expand your capacity before things start to fall apart. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Garrett. It's so great to have you here today. I would love to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Kim, thanks for having me. I'm Garrett. I'm the founder of Gnosis Therapy. We opened in downtown Long Beach, California, 2018, to help people that were experiencing burnout. They would show up with aches and pains, musculoskeletal issues, some rapid heart rates, trouble getting to sleep, some frustration in their interpersonal relationships. And most of it came down to their relationship with work. And even more than that was their relationship with themselves and how they felt like they had to do their work to qualify it as good work. And so that kind of came out of the work that we were doing. We were showing up and just kind of doing tips and tricks about how to work through this musculoskeletal pain and some stress responses. But the further we would kind of get down the line, the more we would kind of all funnel everybody in from these very different aches and pains and fears and frustrations into this like core belief system that would always consistently show up with more often than not.
What's so interesting to me about that, and what's so important, I think, for everyone listening to understand, is that it's easy to confuse physical, emotional, mental symptoms, right? And so I think, I've certainly been there before where you're not sleeping well or you're feeling some muscle aches and you just assume that, I exercised wrong or something like that. But it's, how did you start to put the pieces together and realize what was actually happening there?
Yeah, my own experience with chronic pain. I was working a lot of hours. I was bartending at night and working in a corporate job during the day, trying to pay for school and all the other fun stuff, right? And so there was like pots of coffee a day and lots of personalities. And then when my personal relationship kind of took a toll, there wasn't a lot of outlet or emotional support for me because I was in a leadership position at my corporate job. And so it felt really isolating and alienating. And then I'd work out to kind of work through my stress. But after a while, I ended up having this really high interior groin pain on my right side. And one night it was a Friday night after work, it was like 9 o'clock. I finally got off and was like, okay, I don't have to go to the bar tonight. I can go to the ER. And I show up and the attending physician did a palpatory examination. At the end of that, he was like, there's nothing here. And there was almost this like accusatory tone that was my excitement for my Friday night, was going and having him do a palpatory examination. And looking back now, knowing what I know, at the time, I didn't realize that very real physical pain can be coming from mental, emotional distress. And chronic stress typically is where that stuff shows up in the body. And the tools he had, a prescription or surgery, aren't really the tools that I needed. And so that wasn't quite the wake-up call I needed at that time. Looking back now, I'm like, oh, that's what was going on in that moment.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so Did you have a wake up call? Was there something else that happened that sort of made you realize I can't ignore this any longer? I need to do something different than I'm doing today?
Yeah, it was almost like 7 years later. Um, I was at a different organization, and we were working with health and wellness professionals, making sure that they maintained their performance. And it was a pretty interesting organization where it was really performance based. So we would look at P&Ls, but then we would look at like weekly sales reports, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. And so if I was at the top of the list, I'd feel good. I would sleep good. My relationships would be good. My dog would be cute. If I was at the bottom of the list, my dog would be the same dog, but somehow more irritating that day. Uh, and so anytime I kind of got down on myself and was like, wow, this is really like a lot. This is a lot. I would just be like, okay, I need to work smarter. There's got to be something I'm not paying attention to or I'm missing. There's something else I can do. And it was great because we had such a tight feedback loop. You could go make a change and see how quickly it affected something or not. But it almost gave me this false sense of control where it felt like, okay, everyone else is doing so well. I'm struggling. Must be something wrong with me. I must dig in deeper and try to work even smarter than I've been before. And so there was a colleague that had been with the organization for 20 of their 25 years. And he was always at the top of this list. And he always had a smile on his face, always seemed like unshakable, just this stoic, leader. And we're like, oh, that's the guy. If we could be him, we'd be good. And he was let go really suddenly. And I was in a meeting with his replacement 2 weeks later. And it was in that meeting that we gotten word from another colleague that he had decided that he'd given so much of himself, his identity, his life for so long that without that position, there really wasn't a whole lot left for him in his own life. And so he decided to have that be the end of his story. And so that was the real wake up call, was recognizing like, you're not alone. Even the people that are doing the best, that seem to have it all together, they're struggling too. And we're all suffering in silence and thinking there must be something I'm doing wrong. And really, this burnout that everyone's going through is very real and very important to treat. Because if we don't, the worst case scenario, like what happened to my colleague, could happen to any of us.
Mm. It's so important what you just said about we're all suffering in silence because I can't tell you how many times I hear from clients, from people that I talk to, some variation of either, am I the only one who's saying these things, right? Or everyone else seems to be doing so well. Why am I struggling? And that I think that facade that we all prioritize and, pretend that we're all doing well is hurting all of us because we all think I should be more like that person without realizing, like you said, the behind the scenes of that person is likely very different from what they're projecting to the outside world.
Yeah. And some of that I think comes from like a healthy place where they're like, things are tough. I don't want to make it tougher.
Mhm.
Right. Things are hard for others. If you're a leader, I want to make sure I can hold myself together. So that makes it easier for them to have their stressors. And there, I think there is some health to that. But if you're like really faking it and you're like trying to hold, that's not healthy or sustainable. And at a certain point, like, even if you do get that success from those people, it feels almost like it's not connected to you because it's connected to this false mask that you've almost put on. And you know that that's not the real you, but everyone else doesn't know. And so now you feel even more isolated than ever before. And that's its own special type of extra turmoil emotionally, mentally for people.
Yeah. So for people listening,
Mhm.
you've shared some of this, but I would love to really emphasize what are the kind of symptoms that we're talking about here? Like how do people listening know that's me and I should probably think about pursuing some help here?
If you're questioning whether you're burned out or not, you probably are.
Hmm.
The question isn't necessarily so much now, and obviously I have a selection bias because of the type of work I do, isn't are you burned out or not? It's what stage of burnout are you in? How severe is it at this point? Um, is it habituated to the point where it feels like, no, this is just how things are, and we're like in a state of learned helplessness? Or are we like really like trying our hardest and it just doesn't seem to like quite be enough? And so we're trying to figure out how to double down on those efforts. Those are kind of both stages of burnout, one at the very end, one at the very beginning. Um, and so if you've been burned out before, you're more likely to burn out again. And so I think that's probably the biggest predictor of burnout.
Hmm. And one of the things that I think about and hear when it comes to burnout is that the same forces that lead to burnout also make it really hard to do anything about because there's that fear of taking time away from what we feel we need to be doing in order to work on ourselves. And I think these are also people who are not just feeling overwhelmed at work, but also carrying a lot of personal responsibilities, family responsibilities. And so, can you talk a little bit about sort of how to fit this into a busy life?
Yeah. And so I think I mean, you have responsibilities at home with your family, right? Whatever that looks like for you, friends, whatever that may be. And you have to keep the roof over your head. So you still have to show up and be responsible at work. And you probably have people that you don't want to disappoint there either. So now it can kind of feel like there's too many demands, too high of expectations, not enough hours in the day. And there's some real truth to that because those are all very real stressors. And there's times in our life where they get really challenging and there's times where they get easier. But regardless of the stressors that are in our life, our skill with being able to handle the stress is a different skill. We might be able to change. We might be able to get a new job, different boss, healthier relationship at home. You might be at a better bed so you can sleep better at night, whatever the thing may be that can help. But how you respond to stress and how you manage your own stress response seems to be the most impactful way to sneak in all this like helpful things into a busy life without having to get a new partner or a new boss, because those are sometimes more stressful and unnecessary changes that people feel like they have to make because it's like, oh, it must be this problem, when really it may not be. It might just be the tolerance you have to navigate that volume of stress is so diminished because your ability to actually mitigate the effects of stress on your body is where it shows up.
Yes, and I think that's a really important point too, is that you can learn to manage stress in place because I think that, and I'm certainly someone who has fallen into this trap many times as well as that all or nothing thinking that you're describing.
Yeah.
I'm either going to continue to do things exactly the way I'm doing them now, or I'm going to overhaul my whole life, right? And since I don't have time for that, I'm just going to,
Yep.
stay the course. And so I think thinking about how you can make changes without dramatically, get, like you said, changing relationships, jobs, etc., is
Yeah.
very hopeful. I think that gives us a lot of, maybe inspiration to try to think differently about this.
Yeah. And I've seen it work with a lot of people. It's amazing. Like there's the window of tolerance idea, Dan Siegel, where your ability to function optimally is inside of these extremes of hyper and hypo, and it's your nervous system's ability to regulate. And it always goes up and down through that. But the window of tolerance, even as it goes up and down, if you have a wide one, it's really easy to handle those stresses. But the narrower it gets, the more challenging it is to not experience hyper and hypo arousal, where it's like too much or not enough, where you're just like dead on the couch and can't move unless there's an emergency. Then there's an emergency, you rise to the occasion, and then you crash back down again. And it's like we're skipping over that place where you can actually be a real human being that enjoys the fullness of life. But the longer we've been in a stressed out state, the smaller that window gets. And so any intervention you can do to widen that window just for a little bit makes it easier to stay there, makes it easier to find it again when you get dysregulated, makes it faster to get back in. It's like training cardiovascular strength. How high can you get your heart rate? Great. But how quickly can you recover back down to a normal heart rate afterwards?
Mm.
That's kind of the measure we're looking at when we're talking about the skill of stress management, I guess.
What are some of the interventions? Like what does it look like to better manage stress?
Yeah, I think the progressive relaxation response that you can get from your body is a really powerful one. It's an innate one. It innervates every part of your body and it clouds how you can think about things. It's kind of like Midas's golden touch. Everything you touch turned to gold. When you're stressed out, everything you touch turns to stress. It doesn't matter if it's a good thing or a bad thing. You're like, oh, I got the promotion. Oh, wait, I got the promotion. Oh, no. No. Ah. Oh, I got the house that we wanted. We closed the deal. Oh, no. Right. So the idea is, okay, what can we do to make it easier? And so some of the most practical things I've seen is eliciting that relaxation response from your body. So a nice, easy way to do it that you can do while you're driving or in a board meeting or in a conference call is clenching and creating a bunch of tension in your body and then letting it go and noticing the difference between those two. If you create a bunch of voluntary tension and then you create the relaxation response, it drops you deeper and deeper into that parasympathetic state almost on demand. And so one of my favorite ways to do that is to clench your jaw, hold your diaphragm in like someone's going to sock you in the gut, and then contract your pelvic floor, the anterior and the posterior, and squeeze your fist as tight as you can. And you're just holding it, just full max tension, and then let go. And then full max tension and let it go. And every time you let go, that baseline tension that you're feeling in your musculoskeletal system drops just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So it's easier to access that relaxation response.
What's interesting to me hearing you say that is how, and I won't speak for everyone, but how often I catch myself clenching my jaw without realizing it. And so
Yeah,
just being able to recognize when you're tensing up and having an alternative to that, I think is really helpful too, because that just that shoulder tension that comes, or the thing, just the way in which you're carrying yourself and you don't even realize it, I'm sure contributes even more to the stress state.
absolutely. I think that's where most of the muscle skeletal issues that you see show up in chronic stress states come from, is that like baseline tissue tension. Like the arm can't fully relax. It's got tension in it. It's like the muscles are slightly contracted, bracing to be ready for the next threat, wherever it may be. And so it's really interesting if you lean deeper into that threat voluntarily, clench it, go even tighter with your jaw, you clench the teeth down even more, and then you fully relax. You're able to notice the difference between the two versus just that low grade tension all the time just becomes our new norm. We're almost like unaware of it until you're like, oh, what is clicking in here? What? I can't get through this steak. Is it tough? No, it's fine. Whatever the thing is. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I can't even tell you. I mean, I've went to the dentist probably 3 or 4 times in a 3 month period, convinced that I had a cavity because my teeth were hurting so much. They're like, nope, nothing's wrong. It's just you're clenching your jaw. I was like, geez, I really got to work on this. So I can see too, like you said, how it would show up in other headaches, right? Neck and shoulder pain, things that we might otherwise think are, attributable to some outside force, as opposed to just the stress and the way that we're reinforcing it.
Absolutely. And stress does have physiological effects on our body that do show up. Dehydration makes it easier to experience stress. Lack of sleep makes it easier to experience. It's distressing in of itself, but then every experience you have is more distressing as well. So there are some like bio budgets that we would need to pay attention to help support our body, to give it the types of resources it needs so it can metabolize that stress faster for us. And if we don't have that in place, like, we're working against ourselves in that, bro. So that's sometimes the low-lying fruit. But if you have a history of like insomnia and sleep issues, maybe that's not the easiest place to start, but it may be an important part of navigating the burnout symptoms.
So if someone comes to you,
Mhm.
what are you doing with them?
Yeah. So there's so many things that can be helpful. And there's not one thing that works for everybody. So the most important part is finding who that person is, what they have going on, and then move from there. So really, we do this kind of A3 framework, which is just a cutesy name for assess, accommodate, and align. And so we go through a full assessment. What's going on with you on a sensory threshold level? Are you someone who like needs to be in a library setting to be able to focus? Or are you someone who like could be at an arcade in the 80s, all the dinging of all the machines going on, and you're still like, no, this is great. I love this. This is amazing. Those are very different types of people. And if you're in a mismatched of your nervous system's threshold needs from what that environment is, just to do the simple task is going to be so overwhelming for you. Almost everything else is a joke if that's not accounted for.
Mhm.
And so something as simple as that is one of those kind of a 7 assessments we would put people through. And then when we know it, we can be like, oh, okay, can we accommodate your unique nervous system needs in the way you do your work or have to do your work? And then can we align how you set up your day, your week, your month to make sure that it's maintaining that accommodation? So it's easing the effort, lowering the friction, increasing the ease. Yeah.
Does it, maybe requires too strong a word? Would it be helpful to talk to your manager about what you're trying to do? I mean, obviously it's going to depend on the relationship and the circumstances, but do you think that this is something that works better if you have external support around you?
Yeah. I think burnout, I mean, it is a workplace phenomenon, right? So if we're not addressing it at work, then we're in trouble. The hard part is there's so many different types of people, and there's certain personality profiles that are more akin to burning out than not. That one person that you're talking to at work, they're like, I'm fine. And the next person's like, I am broken by this.
Mm.
And the workplace isn't necessarily as flexible enough to accommodate all of those people from like a top down system. So if you have a really close, amazing relationship with your supervisor and there's a lot of trust there and some advocacy for them, then yeah, absolutely. If you have a really innovative corporate culture, creative team that like wants the best for everybody, it's definitely something to talk about. But in the meantime, we can't wait sitting on our hands hoping that eventually they'll create an initiative and that it'll get picked up and that it'll roll out and that it'll be feedback and that it'll actually be perfectly designed for what you need in that moment.
Yeah.
That's like the long way around. I'm hopeful for that. But I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to hold my breath. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a really good point too. I think that there's an individual and a collective opportunity here.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the more we know about it, the more we recognize it, I think the better it will be in the future. Because I don't think people want to burn people out. I think they just think right now we don't know what to do. And so it's the cost of doing business is kind of oh, that's a you issue. That's a you issue. Instead of seeing it as a big whole that we're all experiencing it. And so we're like, what triggers it for one person versus another looks so different. It's hard to be able to be like, oh, this is what it all is. But when we notice the mismatch between the person and their environment and what they actually need, regardless of what that person needs, that's where that burnout shows up at.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the other things I was thinking about too is just this physical and emotional sort of synergy or
Yeah.
how they work together.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. We've been talking about the fact that sometimes stress shows up in physical symptoms, and you gave your example of how the ER doctor kind of said there's nothing wrong with you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes there is something wrong with us, right? I mean, I've talked to people who have autoimmune disorders that maybe were stress induced at some point, or
Absolutely.
there are physical conditions that we
Yep.
live with. Do you recommend thinking? I mean, not. I'm trying to think of how to frame this without overcomplicating things, but do you recommend if you are somebody who's maybe seeing themselves in the profile of people that we're talking about, not just stopping at a physical diagnosis, but actually thinking about some of the stress management too? Like sometimes when you go to a doctor and they give you a diagnosis or a medication or something, it's like, oh, phew, now I know what I'm dealing with.
Mhm.
But there's still probably some stress involvement, or at least the possibility that stress could make it worse. So, how do you see the relationship between sort of the relationship of your physical doctor and what we're talking about here?
Yeah. Pain, I think, is a really fun example of that because it's very strange. And so there's like the rubber hand experiment where they put your hand underneath the table and they put a rubber hand on top. They stroke your hand as they stroke the rubber hand. And then they'll do some like nefarious things like smash the rubber hand with a bat and your hand will have pain and you'll be like, that hurt. But yet your hand was under the table. There's no damage being done physically, but yet it still causes distress to your system. Um, and that distress carries a physiological response. And if we're really high acute version of stress and then we get a long recovery, excellent. We get stronger. We get more resilient. We can handle more stress in the future. But if we have like low grade stress consistently for a long period of time with no recovery, our nervous system, our social systems aren't evolved to really handle that very well. And so that's where I think we see some of the more flare ups of like autoimmune conditions or even pain flare ups. People are like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. And then all of a sudden it just came out of nowhere. And it's like, sure. So you've had Hashimoto's or Graves your whole life, but like right now you're having a flare up. Well, what was going on the 3 months, 6 months prior?
Mhm.
There's something that you were getting that you're no longer getting, or there's a stressor that wasn't there that is now. And so we have to be able to make sure we're navigating that stress response, be able to give your body as much support as it possibly can. If we can dump out that little chronic inflammation every day from the stress, then maybe we'll have less flare ups or less intense flare ups, which would be really nice for people.
Mm. Yeah, I think that is important for one of the recommendations that I always make before even taking action is really observe yourself
Yeah.
in spaces where you experience stress, right? Because we don't really know what those stressors are until we pay attention to them. And sometimes it's just your day's a blur, right? See, so I like your point about what's been happening in the last 3 to 6 months so that you actually slow down and say, oh, I got a new manager and that's been really stressful, or oh, I've been working longer hours, things that you can physically point to as contributors to change.
Yeah, and there's that perceived stress scale that people can fill out, which I think is really fascinating. But even when you put someone through a physiological stressor, sometimes consciously that won't be enough to register that they're under distress. They'll be like, "Oh, fine, nothing changed." But cognitively, on their tests, the performance will suffer.
Hmm.
And so by the time it does show up to your conscious awareness, it's been there for so long and uncared for that, you know, I don't know, for anybody out there who has a kid and it's like crying, they're like, okay, cool, I'm going to check their diaper. That's one of the things I'm going to check. Like, are they wet? Do they need to be changed? Are they hungry? Are they tired? It's these normal things. But sometimes by the time it becomes conscious awareness, it's been sitting there for so long, unattended to, uncared for, that we didn't even know it was even there because we are really resilient and we are these kind of overachievers, high achieving, high masking people. And so the question is like, not how much can you do with how little? It's how much better would you feel if we gave you more?
Yeah, because I think to your earlier point, a lot of us wait until a crisis point because we either feel like we don't have time to deal with it right now, there's something more important, or it's not registering. Like you said, we're just, sort of not paying close enough attention. So you mentioned, and I forget what you called it, about kind of tensing up voluntarily and
Mm,
then relaxing.
yeah,
Are there other things that we could maybe do a little bit more proactively, even if we don't necessarily see ourselves in a really high stress state right now, that can be helpful in maintaining a lower baseline or getting ahead of it, so to speak?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think one of the easy things to, they have a bunch of wearables now that can track your heart rate variability. And that's like a really nice physiological response of like chronic stress in your body or chronic resilience, depending on where we are on that scale. And noticing trends over a period of time is a really powerful tool. And being able to have some type of feedback where we're not waiting for like frustration with the dog or a strained relationship or a missed deadline or a couple of sleepless nights, we might be able to see that change in the physiology sooner instead of waiting for like, where that line is and we're crossing it, trying to come back. And then anything that can improve that HRV is really powerful. They've done a lot of studies for soldiers that are being deployed that the people with the highest heart rate variability are less prone to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome after they come back from deployment. And these are people that are stationed in the same unit. They've been trained doing the same thing. They're doing the same tasks, the same jobs. Obviously, they're different people, so you can't control for everything. But it does seem that there's a high correlation between heart rate variability and your resilience to developing like a stress response diagnosis.
Interesting. So is that similar to what you were describing, is about the that window? So the greater variability is a bigger window.
Window.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the more highs and lows you can handle without it overwhelming your ability to metabolize it for, a nice catch-all an analogous term there.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm curious. I have like just this personally curiosity based question because I hear people talk about it. What are your thoughts on the whole cold water thing, right? In terms of like
mm,
voluntarily stressing yourself out. Is that something that you recommend, that you think is a good way to kind of just introduce a really stressful thing? And do you see it working?
you would have to have such a nice baseline of recovery in the first place for that to be effective. If you're stressed out and we're adding more stress to your nervous system, we're just going to get more stress from it. If
Ah.
you are doing really well and we add some more incidental stress and we give you a chance to recover from it, now you're more inoculated against that type of stress in the future. So there are a bunch of studies out there that verify that like cold immersion is interesting to help anti-inflammation post long endurance, power endurance sports. So like if you ran a marathon, you swam a race, getting in some cold water afterwards is going to help speed along that anti-inflammatory process. It seems to be. Who knows what's actually happening, right? But doing that like hot cold shower contrast, lots of people report that it wakes them up, it makes them feel good, it like gives them a sense of energy that they don't need to drink their coffee because they have that. Great. I don't know if we put a bunch of heart rate variability monitors on everybody that was doing that or not doing that, what the results would show.
Mhm.
Um, but I do think if you were on the lower end of that heart rate variability, you would see it tend to dip lower, not necessarily rise up higher into the middle.
Interesting. So it sounds like, generally speaking, you don't benefit from introducing more stress until you've gotten your actual stress under control, because otherwise you're just aggravating a situation.
Aggravating.
Mhm.
Yep. Which we all do, right? You have like an open wound in your mouth and your tongue keeps playing with it. It's like a natural thing. We see an accident on the side of the road. We're all looking. Oh, we like to aggravate things when they're already bad instead of like letting them be. But it is interesting if like people talk about the growth zone or the comfort zone and they say, oh, all growth and all the things you want comes outside of your comfort zone. And they're not wrong. But the hard part is getting outside of the comfort zone to go to the growth zone when you're already in a state of distress is almost impossible. And the longer you've been in that state of distress and the more things you've tried, the harder it is to believe that trying is even worth the effort. And the more reasonable and rational it becomes to conserve all of your energy, to just bear down and like wait for it to end and just. And then sometimes, a lot of situations, you may be in a situation where you can't do anything about that stressor. And so that is a rational, reasonable thing to do. But if we can figure out small little ways to add more safety, it makes it much easier to leave your comfort zone. If, you're on top of a building walking a plank for some reason, I don't know why you'd be doing that. And you look down and you're like, okay, I've been walking since I was, however many months old. I know how to put one foot in front of the other, but the stakes feel so high. Having someone yell at you or threaten you or like splash cold water in your face isn't going to make it feel safer or make it easier to move forward. In fact, it's probably going to make it harder to take that first step. And even if you get halfway across, it may not be enough to continue to get all the way to that next point of safety. But if we like strap you in, we put a net underneath there, we get everybody encouraging you, it might feel a little bit different to take that first and second step and a little bit easier to get through. And so I think a lot of times we think performance is about like doing more with less, when really it's about adding more safety, a larger runway, to make people feel easier to get more performance from themselves.
So to that point, and I know we talked about managing stress in place, right? Not
Yeah.
not feeling the need to make a lot of changes. But at what point do you decide, yeah, this isn't really going to work unless I change my environment? Like, is there a line there that you think people should pay attention to? Because some people are in really psychologically unsafe work environments or really damaging personal relationships, right? And I'm sure there's no one size fits all answer to that question, but is there a recommendation you have for like how to think about, yeah, this is probably going to require an environmental change too?
Mhm. Yeah. And so if you think about making that environmental change and that overwhelms you, right, and kind of slows you down, maybe the question is, okay, if I was to decide to do that big change, what are all the things I would need to have in place to make that as easy as possible for me to make that transition? Okay, if I do those now, why wait? Okay, how many of those can I do with what I have available to me now? Great. Maybe you do 3 of the 10 things you could do, and maybe everything changes. Maybe it doesn't. And you do another 3, and you got 6 of the 10 things you can do, and it does then. Or maybe you have 10 of the 10 and you're still like, no, this is terrible. But now you have prepared yourself to feel safe enough to make that big transition and that change. And you're probably going to feel more confident because you're like, man, I've done everything there is to do. Still no good, very bad thing. Okay, so this is not me anymore. It may not even be that person, but it's definitely this dynamic isn't healthy for either of us. So now we need it. Someone needs to make a change, right?
Yeah, what I love about that too is that it takes the stress of making the change off the table temporarily, but puts all the pieces in place to prepare you for it if you reach a point where you conclude this is what's going to be required. So, yes, you win either way, right?
Yeah, you win or you prepare for a bigger change that you will also now be more prepared to
Better
win at.
prepared for. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, for people who are listening, I have a quick question that I'm going to ask you where they can
Yeah.
find you. Do you see people virtually or do they have to see you in person?
No, virtual is primarily most of my business now. It was different prior to 2020, but now, I'm lucky enough to have some people that are in Thailand and the UK
Oh,
and
wow.
all over the States. So yeah, it's kind of fun trying to navigate the time zones. I'm still not great at
I'm
that,
sure.
but we make it work. We make it work.
That is great. So, for anyone listening who wants to learn more about you and your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, if they want to be really professional, they can follow me on the professional social media, LinkedIn. If they want to be a little bit more personable, they can follow me on Instagram, or they can go to my website, and all of those are Gnosis Therapy.
Excellent. And I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. Thank you so much, Garrett. I've learned a lot. This has been a really great conversation, and I appreciate you being here.
Kim, thanks for having me. It's really fun to talk about all of this stuff. So I think it's important.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.